Hello and welcome to the New World Review, your source for everything anime and manga. And today, it's JoJo o'clock again, because I've just finished Golden Wind, and I have brain thoughts. The worst kind of thoughts. Because this particular JoJo, look, it was an interesting experience. And first up, there will be spoilers for part 5 of JoJo's Bizzare Adventure, if anybody watching this actually cares. I mean, you're watching a review, so that should probably be evident, but just in case, be aware of that. And one other disclaimer, I also apologize in advance for butchering Italian names with my horrific Australian twang. To begin though, I have to say that Golden Wind is 100% the best produced series from the perspective of pristine art and animation. I really wasn't quite sure about it going into this, because the art is initially super abrasive for me coming off the more simplified, cutesy tone of part 4, but this notion was very quickly dismissed, and I really appreciated the artistic drive thrown into Golden Wind, which I think was a necessary decision because it was taking place in the real world, and not just anywhere in the real world, but Italy. And Italy is such a wonderfully detailed and content-rich feast for the eyes all on its own, so it's only natural that the characters and animation match that style. Speaking of Italy though, that setting was a pretty incredible highlight for me, because I've traveled all around that country, and I found myself recognizing a disgusting amount of places that our characters found themselves in. I mean, Napoli, Rome, Venice, Pompeii, almost every new location gave me this sense of incredible nostalgia. And that's interesting because that's not something that I got from Battle Tendency, which also had a large stretch of time in Italy, but it never really focused too much on its geography. So Golden Wind is a huge win for me there. Now in terms of genre, Golden Wind starts out by portraying a seedy crime drama, which I was really excited for, especially after hearing about the scale of the organization, all of its cells, and the mysterious boss. But in the end, I'm not exactly sure if it stuck to that genre. The thing about Golden Wind is it actually reminds me a lot of Stardust Crusaders. Almost the entirety of the series is based on travel, except in Golden Wind it is done significantly better because the goal of travel continues to change. However, the resulting format is much the same. Essentially, every time our merry band of gangsters arrives somewhere or attempts to get somewhere, there is always a stand user or two waiting for them, and there were times in Golden Wind where that got simply tiring, which is exactly the same feeling that I had with part 3. I mean, for example, when they all boarded the plane and were flying to Sardinia, the writing was on the wall, quite literally actually, because I've seen what happens when JoJo characters board a plane and it always ends with them crashing. So in this particular case, the stand that appeared, which was super cool, I love the idea of a stand enduring after death, but it felt like nothing more than an obstacle artificially thrown in the way, preventing the story from continuing. And I also take the point that this specific scenario was also designed to awaken Trish, but that's just how it felt. Another few episodes dealing with yet another roadblock. And I guess in general it was kind of disappointing that things did just proceed like that, because I was hoping for a more radical genre shift, with maybe some antagonistic characters who would be relevant beyond the stand of the week storyline, just as a lot of them became relevant in part 4. But speaking of characters, now, Giorno, quite probably my least favorite JoJo, aside from Jonathan. I will say that he had me incredibly intrigued for the first couple of episodes, because I do really love the explanation of why he exists, being the spawn of Dio, but with Jonathan's body. That is a fascinating exploration waiting to happen right there. Part Joestar, part ultimate evil dickbag. And I was very much hoping that that would play into Giorno's arc over the course of the series. Like, I don't know, maybe every now and then Giorno would just snap, lose any sense of morality, and get lost in that Dio aspect of himself that he would have to keep in check with the Joestar part of him, and thus continue the seemingly eternal struggle. But obviously, none of that happened, and I can't honestly say that Giorno really developed much at all during the series. The point at which he begins Golden Wind is very much the point at which he ends from an internal character perspective. He starts out wildly driven, super smart, and with an innate sense of justice, and then nothing ever happens to change or evolve that. Once again, this is another case where the majority of the dramatic weight falls to those around the JoJo, and I have to say that Golden Wind in that regard is quite possibly the best in the series thus far. All of Bucciarati's team, including Bucciarati himself, have their own wonderful character arcs, and the one that comes to mind right away is Abbacchio, who spends a lot of his time in the series learning to trust Giorno, and we get to see his early days as a police officer, and it makes his death so impactful. Come to think of it, we get to see flashbacks of every character on the team, including Giorno to be fair, and I guess, yeah, it is easy to understand why he does the things he does, but Giorno just, like, he doesn't feel human to me. He's a deus ex machina who looks like a human, designed to assist this band of flawed but incredibly charming characters on their human quest. And I guess that's my ultimate problem with Giorno. He has no flaws. Every move he makes is cold and calculated to perfection. Like, I can't think of a scenario off the top of my head where Giorno actually made a mistake and incurred consequences as a result. Whereas if I cast my mind back to Josuke or Joseph, they're covered in faults at every step of their respective journeys that lead them to increasingly more interesting and higher stakes situations, which makes it much easier for me to identify with them. However, like I said, it doesn't really matter because Golden Wind offers a collective of fantastic characters to latch onto, and I found myself really looking at this series as Bucciarati's story, or in some cases even Mista's, because he gets featured a lot. Like very disproportionately to the rest of the group. You can tell that Araki absolutely loves him, but that's fine because I also love him as well as his stand. So in my opinion, that was just Araki playing to the strengths of what Golden Wind became. To the other end of the spectrum now, our ultimate antagonist, the boss or Diavolo. And he was pretty fascinating to follow until I found out who he was, oddly enough. I very much preferred the shadowy figure to the person he ended up being presented to us as, because he ended up being another evil for the sake of evil character. However, he did come equipped with two fantastic features, one of which is his split personality with Doppio. Anytime Doppio was on screen, I was 100% compelled because that is the kind of stuff I love. I mean, to think that someone like Diavolo would have such an incredible flaw in the very comparatively easy to kill and super quirky Doppio personality. It's really great, and I also enjoyed how well implemented Doppio was to take maximum advantage of the situation that the two had found themselves in. It was actually one of those things where for much of the series, I was convinced that Doppio would be the key to defeating Diavolo because he was built up as such an invincible combatant thanks to King Crimson, but Doppio was certainly not invincible, and I don't know, maybe he might have gotten into a situation where he had a change of heart due to some sort of profound character growth and committed suicide, thus killing Diavolo as well. But instead, the split personality served a more technical purpose, which we'll get into. Right now though, the second thing that Diavolo has going for him is King Crimson. This stand is utter madness, and nothing short of a terrifying pleasure to watch, although I think I'd probably be confused as hell if there wasn't a very similar ability in Hunter x Hunter, which obviously pays homage to this, which would be Saraidnik's parallel future. King Crimson is a really cool ability though, and I really enjoyed how anytime you saw that minor time skip happen, it was a big oh shit moment because you knew that it had been activated, and whenever this thing is activated, it is very not good. It's a stupidly powerful stand though, although not the most ridiculous surprisingly, because Gold Experience Requiem is a thing, and that seems to be legitimately invincible and capable of forcing people into endless death loops, which was super cool, but my god, unbalanced as hell. I mean, these characters are getting closer and closer to becoming literal gods in every incarnation of this series. What I do wish we got to see a lot more of though are the characters from former JoJo series. Like when Koichi appeared initially, I was thrilled because I assumed that he would play a big part in Golden Wind, kind of like Jotaro's role in part 4, but then he was nowhere to be seen in the opening, so that made it pretty clear to me that he was only there very temporarily. I did find myself missing that connection to the greater JoJoverse though, and that would come back somewhat in the form of Polnareff, who was a definite highlight for me, especially after he turned into a turtle. But overall, Golden Wind felt more disconnected from the roots of JoJo than even the slice of life story that was Diamond is Unbreakable. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing either, because as an individual story, Golden Wind works very well, and muddling it up with too much JoJo history and outside threads probably would have hurt it quite a bit. But as someone who is constantly interested in the greater saga of the JoJo lineage, I was slightly disappointed to have all of that kind of dismissed here. Speaking of dismissed though, I really do not buy at all that there was no way for Polnareff to contact Jotaro in order to deal with this whole boss situation, especially if Diavolo believed that Polnareff was dead. I mean, just put on a disguise and fly to wherever in the world the man who can stop time is, and then bam, problem solved, sort of. I mean, I get that the organization is powerful and all, but this part of the story is flimsy as hell. I mean, just like most excuses to keep Jotaro out of the fray. However, in the context of Golden Wind alone, Polnareff was great, and I love that he ended up being some sort of turtle key spirit. Now let's talk about the ending though, because I have very mixed feelings about this. The last handful of Golden Wind episodes were very weird to me. Firstly, because at the climax of the entire series, the entire crew did a body swap, which, you know, is a tried and tested storyline, which usually gets played for great amounts of comedy. But I found this to be such an odd spot to place it. Like, we're really gearing up for the final conflict of the series, and then this massive mechanic is thrown at us out of nowhere. It was quite jarring and super strange for the finale of the series to mostly play out with characters inhabiting other bodies, but I will say that it did lead to a nice dramatic standoff when Giorno realized that Diavolo was sneakily hiding inside one of them. I guess the body swap narrative is just something you'd expect to see maybe halfway through the series, once you've established your characters enough to realize why this is weird and interesting, but while the dramatic stakes aren't at their highest. And the final thing I'll say on this is that the body swap really undercut Narancha's death for me, because we didn't even get to see him pass away in his own body. And I personally was still reeling from the bizarre situation that had happened, so yeah. The emotion of losing another team member got very lost in translation for me. And the other thing I wasn't so much of a fan of were the last 2 episodes in general. Another super strange narrative choice here, where after defeating Diavolo, we immediately cut into a 2-episode Monster of the Week story featuring Rolling Stones. And I get that lots of people will probably disagree with me on this, but this story should have played out near the beginning of the series because it really does not have enough dramatic weight to carry the ending of it. I mean, the one profound thing it does do is provide a tragic explanation of how fate was changed to kill 3 people instead of just Bucciarati, which was genuinely touching and sad, but this entire story did not need to be here specifically. You could have shown the whole Rolling Stones thing at the beginning of the series, and then added an extra flashback right at the end here, where like Mr. sees the Rock in Rome, putting an addendum of how fate changed to decide the 3 characters were going to die. And I guess for me it just broke the flow of the series, and then when we did cut back to Giorno and everyone else for the final moments, everything felt like an incredibly rushed ending because I guess he's the boss now and we're done, cool, next part. And I'm assuming that this is how it happened in the manga as well, because I really can't see an animation company taking this sort of liberty in storytelling. If anything, the whole Rolling Stones business feels like an OVA, and while there is something nice about seeing the gang back together once again after losing so many members, I don't feel like it adds anywhere near enough to justify being the final piece of story told in Golden Wind. But overall, while I've probably focused much more on the negative thoughts than the positive ones, I once again had a pretty great JoJo experience with part 5. It's a bit sad that this is the last part available in anime form, but it's been a fun journey, which I will now have to take to the manga format. And speaking of, next up we have Stone Ocean, something that I know jack all about, except this time around we have a female JoJo, which should be fun. And if I had to guess the genre from this one, I guess I'd say prison break story, but that's probably reading too much into things just because of the bar and the handcuffs. Because, you know, if we go by the same things that we see first up in part 3, then I probably would have said prison story as well, rather than epic global adventure. So we shall see. Wish me luck. But that pretty much does it for this review of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 5, Golden Wind. If you enjoyed this video and the content this channel produced in general, then please do consider donating to the New World Review Patreon, because the support of all of you amazing people is what continues to make this channel possible. And if Patreon isn't quite your style, then please do leave this video a like, share, or subscribe, because it also helps support this channel an incredible amount. And if you'd like to join the fun at any time, then please do head over to my Discord server, where a wide array of shenaniganry takes place on a daily basis. And finally, please do comment with your thoughts on Golden Wind. This has been the New World Review, and I'll see you next time.